Did you ever wonder how Victorian women used the bathroom in those huge and heavy dresses? How did they make in time without getting pee on their dresses? Let's find out. Welcome to History Uncovered. Please subscribe to support our channel. In the Victorian era, the concept of indoor plumbing and modern toilets as we know them today did not yet exist. Instead, people relied on chamber pots or outhouses for their personal sanitation needs. Where men could just pull down their pants, women wore big puffy dresses which often were made from heavy fabrics as silk, satin, and velvet. So how did they go to the toilet with all of that? Because there was no indoor plumbing, people relied on chamber pots. Chamber pots were small, portable containers used for urination and defecation. They were often kept under the bed or in a cupboard, and were used at night or when it was not convenient to go outside to an outhouse. Some people also used chamber pots during the day, especially if they lived in a multi-story building and did not want to go all the way down to the outhouse. Chamber pots were emptied into a larger container or bucket, which was then taken outside and emptied into a pit or latrine. Besides the chamber pots, a lot of people also had outhouses. Mostly the wealthier families. Outhouses were small, stand-alone structures that were often located in the backyard or garden of a home. They were simply a wooden shed with a hole in the ground, and were used for defecation only. There was no running water or toilet paper, so people had to bring their own water and use newspapers or other materials to clean themselves. The waste in the outhouse was collected in a pit or latrine, which was periodically emptied by a worker known as a night soilman. It was not uncommon for people to also use public toilets, which were called privy houses or privies. These were located in busy areas such as marketplaces or near public parks, and were usually built by the local government or a private company. They were often very dirty and unhygienic, as they were not cleaned regularly and the waste was not properly disposed of. In general, personal hygiene was not a priority in the Victorian era, and people did not take regular baths or showers as we do today. It was also not uncommon for people to go several days without changing their underclothes. As a result, the odors and smells associated with the lack of indoor plumbing and modern sanitation were a constant presence in daily life. Can you imagine the horrible smell? However, as the Victorian era progressed, there were efforts to improve sanitation and hygiene. In the late 1800s, the first modern flush toilet was invented by Thomas Crapper, and by the early 1900s, indoor plumbing and toilets were becoming more common in wealthier homes. These innovations greatly improved personal hygiene and sanitation, and helped to reduce the spread of disease. So how did women go to the toilet in those huge puffy dresses? During the Victorian era, women's clothing was much more restrictive and cumbersome than it is today. The dresses were often made of heavy fabrics such as silk, satin, and velvet, and were often adorned with layers of ruffles, lace, and other intricate embellishments. These dresses were also extremely long, reaching all the way down to the floor, and were often worn with petticoats and crinolines to add even more volume to the skirt. With such large and cumbersome dresses, using the toilet could be a real challenge for Victorian women. One solution to this problem was the use of chamber pots, which were small porcelain or metal pots that women could use to relieve themselves in the privacy of their own bedroom or dressing room. However, chamber pots were not always practical, especially when women were out in public or traveling. In these cases, Victorian women had to find more creative ways to use the toilet without exposing themselves or ruining their expensive dresses. One option was to use a device known as a urinal bottle, which was a small glass or metal bottle with a spout at one end that could be inserted into the dress to allow women to urinate without removing their clothing. These bottles were often carried by women in their handbags or pockets, and were used discreetly in public restrooms or behind closed doors. Another option was to use a toilet chair, which was a portable chair with a hole in the seat that allowed women to use the toilet while standing up. These chairs were often used in public restrooms or on long train journeys, and were designed to be as discreet as possible. Despite the availability of these devices, many Victorian women still found it difficult to use the toilet in their heavy dresses. Some women chose to simply lift their skirts up and hold them in place while using the toilet, while others enlisted the help of a maid or servant to hold their skirts for them. However, the most common solution was to simply remove the entire skirt, petticoat, and underskirt, and use the toilet in their corset, undershirt, and drawers. This process was time-consuming and often required the assistance of a maid or servant, but it was the only way to ensure that the dress did not get soiled or damaged. In private homes, it was common for women to have a special room or closet dedicated to changing and using the toilet. These rooms were often equipped with a toilet, wash basin, and a vanity or dressing table, and were typically located on the ground floor or in a separate wing of the house. However, in public restrooms or on long train journeys, Victorian women often had to use much more basic facilities. Public restrooms were often poorly lit, cramped, and unsanitary, and were not always equipped with proper toilet paper or other amenities. As a result, many Victorian women preferred to use the toilet in their own homes or in private restrooms whenever possible. Despite the challenges and inconveniences of using the toilet in Victorian times, women were still expected to maintain a high level of modesty and decorum at all times. It was considered inappropriate for women to discuss their toilet habits or needs in public, and many women were taught to be discreet and circumspect when using the toilet. During the Victorian era, menstruation was seen as a taboo subject and women were expected to hide their menstrual cycles and the associated symptoms. There was a lack of understanding about the menstrual cycle and it was believed to be a dirty and shameful experience. Women were often told to avoid physical activity and social interaction during their period, leading to feelings of isolation and shame. One way that women dealt with menstruation during this time was through the use of menstrual products. Rags or cloths were the most common form of menstrual protection, with some women using folded newspapers or even moss. These materials were often reused and washed after use, leading to a high risk of infection. Some women also used sheepskin or leather pouches which were inserted into the vagina to absorb menstrual blood. These were expensive and difficult to clean, leading to a high risk of infection. In the late 19th century, disposable sanitary pads made of cellulose were introduced. These were more comfortable and hygienic than the cloth or sheepskin options, but they were still expensive and not widely available. Many women continued to use cloth or other materials due to the cost. Victorian women also had to deal with the physical discomfort and pain associated with menstruation. Many women experienced cramps, bloating, and headaches during their periods. Pain relief options were limited and often included hot water bottles, warm baths, and herbal remedies. Opium and other narcotic drugs were also used to relieve pain, but these had negative side effects and were often addictive. The Victorian era also saw a rise in the belief that menstruation was a sign of moral weakness and emotional instability. Women were often told that their menstrual cycles were a source of shame and that they should avoid any physical or emotional expression during this time. This led to a suppression of emotions and a lack of support for women experiencing difficult periods. Despite the difficulties that women faced during menstruation in the Victorian era, there were some attempts to improve the experience. In the late 19th century, doctors and scientists began to study the menstrual cycle and understand its causes and effects. This led to a greater understanding of the menstrual cycle and the development of better menstrual products and treatments. Would you live in the Victorian era as a woman? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel to support us. See you in the next one.